My name is Yvonne. I'm 23 years old. And while my brother was handed tuition, a new car, and the keys to a downtown condo, I worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on in a 1-bedroom apartment with a broken heater. My parents called it teaching me independence. They called his life an investment. I called mine survival. The night everything changed, I was serving coffee at a corporate reception after finishing a full shift in the marketing department upstairs. I had been awake since 5 o'clock that morning when a man in a dark suit stepped between me and the catering cart. He stared at my name badge, then at my face, as though he had spent years searching for both. "Did they ever ask you to sign a family tax form?" he asked. The question stopped me cold. Snorts at 18, my father had placed a stack of papers in front of me and told me they were routine. I had signed without reading them. The man's expression hardened. He reached into his briefcase and showed me one page bearing my grandfather's seal, my full legal name, and a number large enough to make my hand shake. Before I could read the rest, he covered it. "They never told you who the real heir was, did they?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to accuse him of lying. Instead, I remembered every bill my parents said they could not help me pay, and every expensive gift they somehow managed to buy for my brother. The man handed me a sealed envelope and told me not to confront anyone yet. 3 snorts days later, my parents called in panic. "Please come home. We need you," but by then, it was already too late. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, tell me what the weather is like where you are right now. Does it match your mood today? I'm curious to see how far this story travels and who is listening. For years, I believed the difference between my brother and me was something I had caused. My father, John, used to say Ethan was built for bigger things, while my mother, Susan, reminded me that I was practical, dependable, and less like a little waste money. Those words sounded almost like praise when I was younger. Only later did I understand what they really meant. Ethan was allowed to dream, and I was expected to absorb the cost. When I was 16, I won a regional business competition and came home carrying a plaque I had polished with the sleeve of my jacket. My parents barely looked up because Ethan had made the reserve list for a college soccer team. We ordered his favorite dinner. My plaque disappeared into a kitchen drawer. At 18, I received an acceptance letter from a university with a strong marketing program. My parents sat me down and explained that the family could not afford to help both of us. Ethan, they said, needed the full college experience because connections would matter for his future. I could attend community college, work, and transfer later. 2 weeks after that conversation, they bought him a car so he would not have to take the bus to campus. I took the bus to my morning classes, worked afternoons at a print shop, and spent evenings answering phones at a medical office. I told myself I was stronger because of it. That was how they trained me to translate neglect into character. By 23, I had earned my degree, found a junior marketing position at Bellwether Media, and kept a second job at a hotel reception desk 4 nights a week. My salary covered rent, student loans, groceries, and the emergency expenses that never seemed to stop. I owned 3 pairs of office shoes and knew exactly how long a jar of peanut butter could last. Ethan, meanwhile, left college without finishing his final semester, announced that traditional education was limiting his creativity, and convinced our parents to fund a technology startup that had no customers and a website full of promises. They paid the deposit on his condo, replaced his first car with a newer one, and celebrated every unfinished idea as evidence of genius. At family dinners, my mother asked whether I was still doing that little marketing job. My father advised me to smile more if I wanted a promotion. Ethan talked about scaling his company internationally, even though he had not made a single sale. I rarely challenged them. Every time I tried, my mother would sigh and say, "Why does everything have to become a competition with you?" Then I would apologize for bringing up the competition they had created. The only person who had ever treated my ambition seriously was my maternal grandfather, Samuel Whitmore. He founded Whitmore Industrial Holdings from a single warehouse and built it into a company that owned logistics centers, office properties, and manufacturing sites across 3 states. When I was young, he let me sit beside him while he reviewed invoices. He never spoke to me as though I were incapable of understanding. He asked what I noticed. He listened to my answers. During my last summer before college, I worked in one of his warehouses and suggested a simple color coding system that reduced packing errors. Grandfather implemented it across the company and sent me a handwritten note. Good leaders notice what everyone else has learned to ignore. He passed away the following year. After the funeral, my parents said the estate was complicated and that most of the company had been placed under temporary family management. Ethan was told he might have a future role. I was told not to concern myself with business matters while I was studying. My uncle Thomas, my mother's older brother, argued with my parents in the hallway that day. I heard only fragments through a closed door. Not what he intended. Fiduciary duty. And she deserves to know. A week later, Thomas vanished from our family gatherings. My mother said he had become bitter over the will. My father called him dangerous. Ethan joked that every wealthy family needed one jealous relative. I accepted their version because I had no other one. The invitation to Bellwether's corporate reception arrived after I helped rescue a client campaign that a senior manager had mishandled. My supervisor, Amy, insisted I attend, saying the event could put me in front of executives from Whitmore Industrial, which had recently become one of her largest accounts. I almost declined because my hotel shift began before the reception ended. Amy persuaded the hotel manager to let me arrive late. I thought the invitation was finally proof that my work had been noticed. I did not know Thomas had seen my name on Bellwether's project team and requested that everyone who had contributed be invited. He had not appeared by accident. He had been looking for a way to reach me without alerting my parents. And the envelope he placed in my hand contained the first proof that the life he had called unfair might actually have been carefully engineered. I did not open the envelope at the reception. Thomas asked me to wait until we were somewhere private, and the urgency in his voice made the room feel suddenly unsafe. We left through a side entrance and walked to a quiet conference room on another floor. He locked the door, placed his briefcase on the table, and removed several folders marked with dates that reached back 5 years. "Before you read any of this," he said, "I need you to understand that I did not stay away because I forgot you." His voice tightened. "I stayed away because your parents threatened to accuse me of interfering with the estate if I contacted you before your trust matured. I believed the court process would protect you. I was wrong." I opened the envelope. The first document was a certified section of my grandfather's will. It named me as the primary beneficiary of the Whitmore Legacy Trust. On my 23rd birthday, I was supposed to receive control of 60% of the voting shares in Whitmore Industrial Holdings, along with income from 3 commercial properties. Until then, my parents had been appointed temporary trustees, responsible for using the trust only for my education, health, and reasonable living expenses. Ethan was named separately. He was entitled to a smaller cash gift when he turned 25, provided he completed either a degree or 5 years of full-time employment. He had done neither. I read the pages twice because the words, "safest asset they own," that answer made the decision for me. I signed the authorization, but this time I read every line. The next morning, I went to work with copies of the documents locked inside my bag. I had slept for less than an hour, yet my mind felt sharper than it had in years. Amy noticed immediately. She called me into her office and asked whether I was ill. I almost told her everything, but Thomas had warned me that my parents still controlled Whitmore Industrial's account with Bellwether. One careless conversation could reach them before our legal request was filed. I told Amy I was dealing with a family matter and asked for 2 personal days after the campaign presentation scheduled that afternoon. She agreed, then surprised me by saying I would be leading the presentation. The senior manager assigned to it had taken credit for my strategy, but could not explain the numbers. Amy had reviewed the work history and knew the concept was mine. For a moment, the two halves of my life collided. At home, people had been using my name to take what belonged to me. At work, someone else had been using my ideas for the same reason. They assumed I would stay quiet. I walked into the conference room and presented the campaign myself. I answered every question, corrected a flawed projection, and secured approval for the largest phase of the account. When the meeting ended, the Whitmore representatives congratulated me without realizing I legally controlled most of the company they represented. I did not reveal it. I simply thanked them, returned to my desk, and opened the secure message from Mara. The emergency petition was ready. At her office that evening, she explained our strategy. We would ask the court to suspend my parents as trustees, freeze disputed accounts, invalidate the proxy filed in my name, and require a full accounting of every distribution. Thomas, as alternate trustee and company director, would call an emergency board meeting once the freeze was granted. Daniel had already traced several transfers to Ethan's condo, vehicle, and startup. The evidence was strong, but Mara warned me that strength did not make the process painless. They will say they acted for the family, she said. They may say you knew. They may attack your stability, your motives, or your relationship with your grandfather. People who rely on your silence rarely surrender when you find your voice. I signed the petition. The following 48 hours passed in a blur of work, legal calls, and memories I could no longer interpret the same way. I remembered my mother insisting I pay her back for a medical bill when I was 19. The trust had reimbursed her for that bill twice. I remembered my father telling me Ethan's condo was proof that bold people created opportunities. The down payment had come from an account bearing my beneficiary number. I remembered Ethan laughing when I declined a weekend trip because I could not afford to miss a hotel shift. He had invited me from a balcony I had unknowingly purchased. On the third morning, the court granted the temporary freeze. My parents were removed from control of the trust pending a hearing. The proxy was suspended. Whitmore Industrial's general counsel was ordered to preserve all records. Ethan's startup account, which had received disputed funds, was restricted from making transfers above ordinary operating expenses. At 10:14 a.m., my father called. At 10:16, my mother called. At 10:18, Ethan sent a message asking what I had done. I stared at the screen until it stopped lighting up. Then my parents called together from the house phone. I answered on speaker while Mara sat across from me. My mother was crying. My father sounded as though he were forcing each word through clenched teeth. "Please come home," he said. "We need you." There was no apology. No question about what I had learned. Only urgency. "Why?" I asked. Silence followed. Then my mother said the company accounts had been disrupted. The board was asking questions, and there were documents that needed my signature. "What documents?" I asked, though I already knew. My father took the phone. "A temporary authorization. This has gone too far, Samantha. Come home. Sign it. And we can handle this privately." I looked at Mara. She shook her head once. "I spent 5 years handling my problems privately," I said. "You spent those same years spending my money publicly." My father's voice rose. "Thomas has poisoned you against your family." "No," I replied. "The bank statements did that." My mother begged me not to humiliate them. Ethan shouted in the background that his company could collapse. I felt the old reflex to calm them, rescue them, make myself smaller, rise in my chest. Then I remembered Thomas's warning. My silence had been their safest asset. "I will come home tomorrow," I said, "but I won't sign anything." My father began to protest. I ended the call. 3 days earlier, they believed I would never discover the truth. Now they needed the person they had trained themselves to underestimate. They were already too late. I arrived at my parents' house the next afternoon carrying one folder and wearing the same navy suit I had worn for the Whitmore presentation. Snorts Mara waited in a car 2 blocks away, and Thomas remained available by phone. I had agreed to meet only after my parents confirmed in writing that Ethan would be present and that no documents would be placed in front of me without my attorney. The conditions made my father furious, which told me they were necessary. The dining room looked almost unchanged from my childhood. The same polished table stood beneath the same brass light fixture. The only difference was the stack of legal notices beside my father's plate. My mother reached for me when I entered, but I stepped aside. Ethan sat with his arms crossed wearing the watch my parents had given him after his startup received its first round of family funding. I now knew that round had come into real life from my trust. "Let's stop pretending this is a misunderstanding," I said, taking the empty chair opposite them. I opened my folder and placed 3 account summaries on the table. Snort's $238,000 was distributed for my education, housing, transportation, and professional development. I received less than $12,000. The rest went to Ethan or to assets controlled by you. My mother looked at the papers without touching them. We used the money for the family, she said. Your grandfather would have understood. His trust says the opposite. My father leaned forward. Legal language is not the same as intention. You were stable. You had scholarships. You could work. Ethan needed a stronger start. I had one partial scholarship. I worked nights because you told me there was nothing left. And look at you, he said, as though my exhaustion proved his wisdom. You became responsible. That sentence was worse than a denial. He was proud of what their betrayal had forced me to become. I turned to my mother. Did you know the trust reimbursed the medical bill you made me repay? Her face changed. It was only a flicker, but it was enough. Your father handled the accounts, she whispered. I removed a copy of the waiver. You witnessed my signature. She began to cry. We thought we would replace the money before you ever needed it. Ethan pushed back from the table. Why are you acting like I stole from you? Mom and Dad made those decisions. I placed an email printout in front of him. It was a message he had sent my father 2 years earlier after a transfer was delayed. If Sam's fund is locked, use the property income. She doesn't even know it exists. The color drained from his face. That was a joke, he said. It was an email about $40,000. I didn't understand the structure. You understood enough to know it was mine. My father struck the table with his palm, rattling the glasses. Enough. You are tearing this family apart over money. I looked at him and realized he still believed volume could turn accusation into authority. No, you tore it apart when you decided one child's future could be used as the other child's allowance. My mother asked what I wanted. For the first time in my life, all 3 of them were waiting for my answer. I gave them the terms Mara had prepared. My parents would resign as trustees and from their interim positions at Whitmore Industrial. They would cooperate with the audit, return any remaining trust property, and provide a written accounting. Ethan would return the vehicle, surrender his claim to the condo equity funded by the trust, and stop using disputed money in his company. In exchange, I would consider resolving the civil claims without pursuing the maximum penalties available. My father laughed once sharply. You think you can walk in here and take everything? I am asking you to return what you took. Ethan accused Thomas of manipulating me so he could control the company. I told him Thomas had already signed an agreement preventing himself from receiving additional compensation or shares during the case. My father called the documents a bluff. My mother begged me to remember birthdays, holidays, and every meal she had cooked. Were those acts of love? I asked. Or payments you now expect me to accept in place of the truth? No one answered. My father stood and told me that if I continued, he would make sure the board knew I was unstable, vindictive, and unqualified. He said Bellwether would hear that I had exploited confidential client information. Ethan threatened to tell the extended family I was trying to bankrupt our parents. My mother said nothing, which felt like agreement. I closed the folder. You have until Monday morning to accept the terms. And if we don't? My father asked. Then the audit goes to the board, the court, and every institution entitled to see it. I walked to the door. Behind me, Ethan said I would regret choosing money over family. I turned back once. I chose the truth. You chose the money years ago. Then I left them sitting at the table where I had spent half my life listening to them celebrate him with resources taken from me. They rejected the terms before midnight. By Sunday morning, my father had called 3 board members and described me as an emotional young woman being controlled by a resentful uncle. Ethan posted a long message online claiming I had launched a legal attack because I was jealous of his success. Several relatives repeated his version without asking me a single question. My mother sent private messages saying she loved me while warning that my actions could destroy my father's health and ruin Ethan's future. The old strategy was obvious now. Turn their choices into my guilt. This time, I did not defend myself in public. Mara advised me to preserve every message and let the record speak where consequences could actually be imposed. On Monday, the emergency board meeting began at 9 o'clock. I entered the Whitmore Industrial headquarters beside Thomas, Mara, and Daniel. My father was already seated at the end of the conference table, occupying the chair my grandfather had once used. My mother sat beside him. Ethan had no board position, but my father had brought him as a future stakeholder. The general counsel asked him to leave. He refused until security escorted him to the lobby. Daniel presented the audit for nearly 2 hours. He traced each distribution, matched it to invoices, and identified false descriptions entered into trust records. The condo had been labeled beneficiary housing. Ethan's car had been listed as transportation for my university attendance. Payments to his startup had been disguised as professional training expenses for me. My father had approved the transactions. My mother had countersigned most of them. They had also charged legal fees to the trust to defend their refusal to provide Thomas with records. Then Daniel revealed the attempted transfer that ended any remaining claim of misunderstanding. Less than an hour after the court freeze was issued, my father had tried to move 90 Loo from a property income account into a newly created consulting company. The bank blocked it. The company was registered to Ethan. My father called it an emergency measure to protect operations. The general counsel called it a potential violation of the court order. When the presentation ended, Mara submitted the certified will and the order suspending my father's proxy. The company's secretary confirmed that the voting shares now had to be recognized in my name. I had walked into the room as the daughter they described, as I now held the controlling vote. I did not make a speech. I moved to remove my father as interim chief executive, suspend my mother from the board, appoint an independent management committee, and authorize full cooperation with the court. Thomas seconded the motion. It passed. My father stared at me as though I had become a stranger. "You have no idea how to run this company," he said. "That is why I appointed people who do," I replied. Leadership is not pretending to know everything. It is knowing when your presence has become the risk. The court hearing 2 weeks later made the consequences permanent. My parents were removed as trustees for breach of duty and ordered to provide restitution for the diverted funds, lost investment growth, and legal costs. Liens were placed on their vacation property and investment accounts. The condo was ordered sold unless Ethan could repay the trust-funded equity within 60 days. He could not. His vehicle was surrendered. His startup lost access to the money that had kept it alive, and an independent review showed it had almost no real revenue. 3 employees were transferred to legitimate positions within Whitmore Industrial, so they would not lose their livelihoods because of his deception. Ethan's company closed soon after. My father and mother were also required to sign a statement correcting false claims they had made to the board and to Bellwether. When Amy received the letter, she called me into her office. I expected suspicion. Instead, she told me Bellwether's records showed I had never accessed confidential Whitmore information outside my assigned work. The senior executives had reviewed my presentation and promoted me to campaign manager. My father's attempt to destroy my job had produced a written record of my professionalism. Ethan's public story collapsed when court filings became available to the relatives he had recruited. Some apologized. Others disappeared. I learned not to confuse either response with loyalty. The heaviest price my family paid was not the loss of property or status. It was the loss of control over the story. For years, they had decided who was gifted, who was difficult, who deserved support, and who should be grateful for scraps. The audit replaced every label with a number, a date, and a signature. Was I cruel for refusing to rescue them? Or had they simply mistaken my kindness for a resource that could never run out? I asked myself that question the night the judgment arrived. Then I looked at the total restitution order and remembered the girl counting coins for bus fare while her brother drove a car purchased in her name. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. 6 months later, Whitmore Industrial no longer looked like the monument to family image my parents had tried to protect. The independent committee uncovered waste beyond the trust violations, renegotiated several contracts, and restored a profit-sharing program my grandfather had created for long-term employees. I accepted the role of board chair, but refused the chief executive position. I kept working at Bellwether while completing governance training and meeting weekly with department leaders. I wanted to earn fluency in the company before making decisions that affected hundreds of people. The inheritance gave me authority. It did not magically give me wisdom. The restitution payments cleared my student debt and replaced what had been taken from the trust. I moved out of my broken apartment, but I did not buy anything extravagant. My first major decision was to create an education fund for employees who worked while studying, with evening schedules and caregiving support for those who needed it. I named it after my grandfather's handwritten principle: Good leaders notice what everyone else has learned to ignore. Thomas became an advisor for 1 year under strict oversight. He never asked for shares, money, or public credit. Eventually, he admitted that guilt had shaped his choices too. He had fought my parents through formal channels, but when they blocked him, he had alwedunquilide distance to become an excuse. I did not pretend that his later rival erased the years he was absent. Still, he had brought evidence instead of promises, and trust began to grow from that difference. My parents moved out of the large house after the liens were enforced. They rented a smaller place and lived on income untouched by the trust. Snorts, they were not homeless, despite what Ethan had predicted. They were simply living without the status my money had helped maintain. My father sent 3 letters. The first blamed Thomas. The second blamed the pressure of managing the family. The third contained one sentence that sounded honest. I knew the money was yours, and I believed I had the right to decide who deserved it more. I kept that letter because it named the wound clearly. My mother asked to meet. I agreed only after she completed the written accounting and corrected the story with every relative she had contacted. At the meeting, she apologized without asking me to withdraw anything. I told her forgiveness was not a door she could knock on once and expect me to open. It would be measured in consistent truth, respected boundaries, and time. We now speak occasionally. We are not close. That is not a tragedy I am required to fix alone. Ethan took a sales job after his company closed. For several months, he sent angry messages claiming I had stolen his future. I replied once, "A future built from someone else's stolen choices was never yours to own." As part of the settlement, he signed over the remaining condo proceeds and published a correction admitting that the trust had funded his lifestyle. He has not apologized directly. Perhaps one day he will. My peace no longer depends on it. People sometimes describe what I did as revenge. They imagine revenge must be loud, impulsive, or destructive. Mine was quieter. I read the documents. I stopped signing what I did not understand. I allowed evidence to reach the rooms where my parents' charm had always protected them. I took back control without becoming the kind of person who had abused it. Most importantly, I refused to save them from consequences they had designed for me. The last time my father called in panic, he said, "Please come home. We need you." Once those words would have sent me running. I would have sacrificed sleep, money, dignity, anything to prove I belonged. That day, I looked around the boardroom my grandfather had intended me to enter, and I understood that being needed wasn't the same as being loved. "I did come home," I told him, "just not to the place where you expected me to remain." Then I ended the call and walked into the meeting. "So, tell me this. If Snorts, the people who taught you to feel worthless, suddenly needed your power to save them, would you give it back? Or would you finally let the truth decide what they deserved? We surely appreciate your support and attention. This fictional story was created only for entertainment, education, and dramatic storytelling. We hope it reminds you that your silence should never be mistaken for acceptance. Sometimes people realize you late that the quietest person was not weak. They were simply done explaining themselves to someone who refuses to listen.